What day is it?
It's my birthday.
It's good to share. But check you have the right privacy settings. Or someone can make a lot of money from being you.
Time to say a very good morning to Mr. Peter Hitchens. Peter, how are you?
Morning. I'm just worrying terribly about that poor money. And does money have feelings? It has to be held in a hotel near Heathrow for several weeks.
Well, this is it. I mean,
under guard before you're allowed to touch it. Quarantine money is probably a major unexamined social problem.
Well, I mean, there are not many things that surprise me, but I'd never seen money that had been quarantined before. It looks very much like all sorts of other money. It was very clean. It didn't look as if it had been anywhere. It looked as if it had literally come straight off the printing machine.
Yeah, there's a machine at Oxford Station which offers you quarantine money and not much reassurance. As far as I know, the whole idea that money could carry any paper money or metal money could carry any kind of serious infection doesn't have much in the way of scientific experimental support. But a lot of people, of course, believe it, and these days we have to cater for a population which believes all kinds of bizarre things. So you can't really blame them for saying their money is being quarantined. Who's going to check, I have to say.
Yes.
But it's the whole problem of money it's quite interesting. I just feel under pressure, the way it's harder and harder to find people who will take cash. They look at you, particularly one of the few pubs I've been to since the regime softened. Was really very, very firm. No, we absolutely do not take cash. We will not accept it. Of course, they have to do that, because if they gave me the beer and I then offered them cash, I'd be settling a debt, in which case legal tender rules would apply and they'd have to accept it. But if they tell you in advance, then those rules don't apply and they can just refuse to serve you unless you agree in advance to use a card. Let's just say, how much privacy do you have if every single thing you spend is recorded by some computer? And how much control over your personal assets do you have if in the end they're all just a mass of electronic dots and dashes in a computer which somebody else can adjust? I find this something extremely creepy about this development. I can't quite see what it has to do with COVID. It just seems to have accelerated very rapidly. I know some Scandinavian countries are actively aiming to be cashless societies. I know there have been all kinds of experiments with poor old Swindon trying to stop people from using cash, but I don't like
in Swindon
for a start. I think it's very. If you lose your contactless card or it's stolen, after October the 15th, the maximum transaction is £100. So imagine the devastation that can be visited on your bank account in half an hour before you realise it's gone. And what will the banks do if you say that wasn't me?
Yeah,
how are you going to settle it?
Well, it's very difficult, isn't it? Because, I mean, I know somebody, when they first brought in contactless payments, and there was a Pret, I think, somewhere near my old office, and somebody used to go in from our office to go and get stuff, and inadvertently pay for other people's stuff by standing too near the contactless machine. It was in his pocket.
Yeah,
and I'm sure it's not as sensitive as that anymore. But I mean, a couple of things happened to me recently that I'll share with you. I took my son to a driving range yesterday. We were hitting a few golf balls and went to pay. And they don't take cash in this place. So I went, gave them my card, and they said, "Oh, sorry, the internet's down." I said, "Right." And they said, "Have you got any cash?" I said, "No." And they said, "Why?" I said, "Well, I don't have cash when I come here because you told me you didn't take cash." So, we were stuck, and I couldn't pay them.
No, well, I'm sure that, but I remember a couple of banks in the past 10 years or so have had quite long periods of being out. People haven't been able to get at their money. So again, if you're wholly dependent on electronic money transfers, then you're very vulnerable to that. And I continue to point out that the global warming frenzy is almost certain to lead to power cuts in times to come. This is because of a thing called inertia. Only electricity generated by gas or coal or hydroelectricity or nuclear power actually provides this inertia. Without it, particularly wind power, is terribly vulnerable to flip-flops on the system, which can cause power cuts, such as the one which happened a couple of years ago, one summer's day. And when those happen, again, if everything's dependent on computer transfer, and computers are wholly dependent on electricity, what will happen? It's extraordinarily vulnerable, leaving aside all the privacy things. But and then on top of that, of course, the government is going to make sure we have less money anyway.
Right. Well, they will tax you some more.
Well, here is the extraordinary thing. People are buying this line that what's happening is that they're increasing taxes to pay for social care.
Right.
It's simply not true. Just as the phrase national insurance is a government lie. National insurance is just tax.
Yeah.
It doesn't go into a fund. It just goes into the general pool of Treasury money, and they spend probably a huge amount of it on what the government spends so much money on already, paying interest on its debt.
Yes.
So it doesn't actually go on paying for your pension at all. Increasing it is a straightforward tax increase. And this will be, and here's another question which has been troubling me over the past couple of weeks. What's happened to the magic money tree? And for all the period of the advanced panic, we were told, the government can spend any amount of money it likes. It doesn't matter all this rubbish about inflation and everything else that's in there. It's all made up by pessimists. There's nothing to worry about. There's no limit on what government can spend. Suddenly now, we're told, no, we have to balance the books. If we're going to spend more money on social care, we've got to get it from you. So what happened to the magic money tree? Why has it suddenly stopped bearing fruit? Why does it suddenly matter now they have to balance the books? Because it always mattered. And because what this actually is the beginning of a long period of inflation, higher tax, and diminished and declining services to pay for the panic of the past 18 months. That's what they're facing. They'll disguise it as they like, and people may believe them, but they shouldn't do. We are in considerable financial doo-doo, and this is one of the early signs of it. There's more to come.
Well, quite. I mean, perhaps the magic money tree has withered and died due to climate change, or due to the amount of money we're spending on climate change, or something like that.
The truth is, it never existed. They just pretended that it was going to be cost-free because it suited them politically. But they all know. I see Adam Tooze, that fine historian, has published a new book, exactly how the governments and their central banks manipulated the whole economic system of the world during this to make it look as if everything was okay. But you look at it and you think, it's the most extraordinary tightrope walking performance. It really wouldn't take much to upset it. And people say, well, there's no inflation. Well, actually, there is inflation. The real inflation statistic of the government, or the nearest one to reality, the old retail price index, the RPI, is going up. The price of almost everything that I buy seems to go up all the time. That doesn't reflect necessarily in the index. Now taxes are going up. And what do you get in return for your money? Particularly if it comes from the state. The state of the GP system, the primary care system of the National Health Service, is now a national scandal. And there was a beautiful cartoon by Matt Pritchard in Telegraph last week of a man meeting another man saying, I don't seem to recognise you. You must be my GP.
That's right. Well, I mean, it comes to something, doesn't it?
People see their GPs now.
No. Well, you know...
Others just don't see them. The GP system has more or less collapsed.
Yes.
And none of this money is going to solve that.
No, of course not. But of course, you know when things have gone badly wrong, when the Secretary of State for Health actually issues a dictum, an instruction to GPs, would you please see more patients? I mean, that's their job, isn't it? I mean, literally, I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but I was sent a sign that was sent to me from outside of a GP surgery a couple of weeks ago, which actually said these words: if you are feeling unwell, please do not enter. Instead, please make a telephone call and the doctor will talk to you over the phone.
And a lot of people end up on 111 or whatever it is, and it not, again, getting telephone consultations, and this can go seriously wrong. But it is a major decline. And what one looking at this, people were constantly told, oh, well, if we spend more and more billions of pounds, particularly during the Blair-Brown era, spend more and more billions of pounds, we can have a health service which is genuinely the envy of the world, which ours currently I don't actually think is.
No.
It doesn't work because there's something wrong, it seems to me, with the whole shape of the system. And certainly in this case, I've heard GPs saying that there are so many people leaving the profession that there was bound to be a crisis soon. And I think the COVID panic accelerated it. But without the GP frontline, then people will have to start doing as they do in many poorer countries, which is starting at the chemists with the pharmacist to try and get some sort of first-line diagnosis. But it's simply, pharmacists are very good, but they're not trained doctors, and it simply isn't as good a shield. And we will, as a result, get many more people developing diseases and conditions which, if they'd been treated quickly, could have been dealt with, but having been neglected, are not. And so it will feed on itself and become worse. I just don't get the feeling that we have saved the NHS.
No, we've certainly not saved it. In fact, you know as well as I do, Peter, that as winter approaches, there will be yet another crisis, the 20th in a row, at which we will be told we've only got, this and many hours to save it, or, we must do this in order to stop overwhelming it. We mustn't go anywhere. We mustn't do anything. I've got a text here from Chile who says, I've just stood in the rain outside my GP's for a prescription for the past 30 minutes due to them not being able to find it, and they're not allowing us into the practice. I mean, you just despair, don't you?
I'm afraid you do, and there are other cases which come across my desk of people who were unable to get a proper diagnosis early. And in one particular case, which has been quite well publicised, I won't go into it here, but in one particular case, the person involved died in agony, having been inadequately diagnosed. It is a serious difficulty. So if they're going to demand, the other problem which the government faces, of course, is that they specifically promised that they would not increase national insurance. It was something they actually said, and they put it in the Prime Minister's name. He actually said, I will not do this, and not just buried on page 94 of the manifesto, but right on the special promise card on the front, sort of Blairite thing. These are the things we will and won't do. I will not do this. I don't think that electorates forgive this sort of thing. And I think they're playing with very, very hot fire.
Yes. Well, I was saying to Julia this morning.
Look what happened to the Liberal Democrats when they
absolutely, they're finished. I mean, I said this to Julia this morning because the style of their now policy changing used to be at least a little bit nuanced. They used to kind of disguise slightly the fact that they told a lie and they now were going to do something completely the opposite. But now they don't seem to care. They just, I mean, literally yesterday, I don't know if you saw him, Nadine Zahawi was on two different interviews, one with Times Radio and one with Sky, in which he said two completely different things. One, he said that, no 12-year-old would be able to get a vaccine without their parents' consent. And then he said the complete opposite. It says Sky.
No, it is. But maybe he's genuinely confused himself. One does often get the impression that ministers are not the people taking the decisions anyway.
Yeah.
So perhaps no one had told him what the spin doctors and the back engine machinery of government had decided to do. And he was rung up between the two interviews and told, but presumably the second thing he said will turn out to be the correct one. But I certainly don't get the impression that all ministers are kept fully briefed. In the Blair era, of course, there were famous instances where poor Blair was put up at some press conference and opened and closed his mouth like a goldfish, as usual. And eventually, Alistair Campbell had to say, "It's all right, Prime Minister, we haven't told you about that yet." But it's rare that you have a government where the Prime Minister doesn't actually know what's going on. But the backroom machinery of this government, which is not accountable, is probably at least as powerful as most ministers and more powerful than many of them. So they may have some trouble finding out what it is they have decided to do.
But in the midst of all of this madness, Peter, and I don't know what your view is about 12-year-olds getting vaccinated, but for the JCBI to come out and basically say, if we were simply talking about the welfare of children, we will not recommend it. However, there may be other considerations. So basically they're now telling us that because of COVID, there are considerations which might be more important than the welfare of our own children.
Very interesting document, the JCBI document. I read it this morning, and it pretty much invites the medical officers of the four parts of the United Kingdom to take the decision for them.
Yeah.
Because I think it would be fascinating to know how they actually decided on that form of words. But it looked to me as if they felt that probably a decision was coming which they themselves couldn't think of any medical reasons for. But they had almost certainly accepted in their minds that there would be strong political pressure for it to happen anyway. Yeah. So they might as well leave it open, that they could say what they could say and then leave a great big hole in it through which the government could drive its...
Yes, but in order to do that, they have to. They've had to more or less abrogate their responsibility as medics.
Yeah, but it's interesting. It's interesting about government. If experts are to be listened to, and this was the expert body set up to advise the government on this, but the experts themselves in this recognise as they write their advice that it's not going to be taken. It's quite interesting, isn't it?
Well, it really is, because they are effectively, as I say, giving the government permission to do something which may not be in the best interests of our children, but it may well be a better thing to do for the rest of society. I find that an extraordinary choice.
Well, it looks like people covering their backs to me, and indeed covering their fronts in this case as well. But that is the way in which these things are done. Now, if we really do, as I say, if we really do have this reverence for experts, which everybody keeps telling me I don't have, and they do, then surely the JCBI are the experts.
Yeah, well, they're not the right kind of experts, I'm afraid. We're going to bring in some more experts in.
I keep mingling with the wrong kind of experts.
Let's talk a little bit, Peter, about your apology from the BBC. Radio 4 documentary about an alleged chemical weapon attack in Syria. This was written about in the Mail on Sunday.
I mean, it wasn't an apology so much as an admission. I think it was only very partly to me. I mean, I was particularly worried because of a source of mine who had been extremely worried about things that were going on at the United Nations Poison Gas Watchdog, the OPCW, and had thought that that their reports had been doctored. And he is a scientist of highly qualified scientist, and I can tell you from experience, a totally unpolitical person. And he really is not. He doesn't have politics to it. What drives him is the search for scientific truth. That's why he has been such a very good inspector for the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons over a very long time. And he was quite upset to discover that he was being portrayed in this program as having quite possibly been influenced by the prospect of financial reward. And WikiLeaks had offered a financial reward, not for what he did, but for something else. But they, as it happens, I checked with them, they've never paid any such reward. My source certainly says he wasn't motivated by it and hasn't received any. And yet the program insinuated that this could have been his motive. They didn't say it directly. And then they also said that he believed that the events in Douma in Syria, about which the report was written, had been staged. And this is a completely unscientific thing for anybody to say. And there are people who believe that, and that's their business. But the truth is, what he was saying was that what the evidence that he had seen did not support the conclusions of an official document, which had been produced by a reputable body. A completely different thing than making a totally unprovable, frankly wild and unscientific claim, which I also have never made and would not make, that the event was staged, and it belittles him in the eyes of the public who don't know what he does or who he is. So I felt it was necessary to defend him. And there was also this again insinuation that he talked to journalists who shared the views of the Syrian and Russian governments. So basically, it's, again, insinuating that what he was dealing with was people who were in some ways not necessarily in the pay of, but certainly in cahoots with the governments of these two unpleasant tyrannies. Well, I don't know. Neither he nor I are anxious to do anything to help the Russian or the Syrian governments. And it's just a smear, basically. And this insinuation was made, and there was no basis for it.
But more importantly,
that was the one against me. I just think what I would say to the BBC. I mean, the program itself is fascinating. I recommend people to listen to the program against which I complain, because a lot of it is extremely interesting stuff, which you won't find anywhere else. It's a good long listen, but what it doesn't do is give any scope at all to the possibility that the supposed chemical weapons attack at Douma in April 2018 might actually not have been as stated, which seems to me to be a major story comparable to the non-existence of Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. And it doesn't. I don't mind them being sympathetic to other views on this. They're entitled to do that, especially if it's open. What I do mind is them not giving a fair crack to any other opinion and treating people who have a different assessment in that way. And I'm very glad that the BBC, and it's extremely rare for them to do so, their executive complaints unit, with whom I've had many correspondences, extremely rare for them to have actually put their hands up to this and said they shouldn't have done it. Right? It's a major victory for the cause of truth.
Well, it is, but it also is slightly troubling, is it not, that they admit basically that they're investigative journalists. And we're talking about Radio 4 here, which is supposed to be their sort of flagship, serious news station. Did not meet the corporation's editorial standards for accuracy and reported false claims. I mean, that's very troubling.
Well, again, there were insinuations rather than direct claims, and yes, and people do this sort of thing. I'm not anxious to have any kind of vendetta against the reporter or the people involved. People get things wrong. What I'm anxious to do is to get the BBC to accept that their reporting of the whole Syria business has up till now been partial and inadequate. And when I saw what they'd said on this program, I thought, well, that they cannot justify this. I know these things to be untrue. I mean, I know them. I didn't think they were untrue. I didn't disagree with them about an opinion they'd expressed. I knew that what they were insinuating wasn't the case. Right. And I thought, well, if they are serious about self-government, and if they're serious about regulating themselves, as they claim to be, then they will have to admit that on this occasion they got it wrong. And in doing so, there'll have to be a rethink. And that's why I plugged away at it. I've been plugging away at it since November. And there were points to it I thought they'd completely forgotten the complaint existed. And suddenly, last week, they came back and said, yep, you're right. Brilliant. And I have to say, I didn't expect this to happen because the BBC's performance on such things in the past has been very poor. I really am not trying to be vindictive against any of the people involved. The programme was in many ways good and is a good listen, but on those things it was severely wrong. And if they can recognise that, then maybe they can reform their reporting of the Syrian issue, which is actually hugely important. Yes. Because there is a grave danger that if we get Syria wrong, it will drag us into what could be another Middle Eastern war and worse than that. Yeah, absolutely right. Peter, we've got to run, I'm afraid. Thank you very much indeed, as ever. Fascinating stuff. Peter Hitchens, Mail on Sunday columnist, of course, man of many parts and, of course, many opinions. And that's what we do here at Talk Radio. We have lots of opinions. You can have them too. 0344 499 1000 is the number.